We'll go ahead.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I know it feels like it's been forever. All right, what we're wanting to do here today is shift and pivot a little bit to really think about, so how would we reimagine collaboration in the world that we're living in right now, and what's that process? Because so much of the work of the LCANs is relying on you're making partnerships, right? So again, I think we're going to jump over these because you've seen that. Do we want to do a poll? Do people feel up for a poll? Or do you want to skip over that? Tell me what you'd like. Give me a nod.
I'm up for a poll. I can start it.
Good.
Let's do it.
Okay. Let's do a how are you doing poll. Check in. Wow, good job, guys. What I really like about this as an exercise is, you know, just a reminder that we all come to these gatherings, you know, jumping from one thing to another, and we're all in different places, you know, in terms of how the day's going, what's going on in life, how we're feeling, and yeah, and that's important to keep top of mind. Can everybody see the poll, or do you need to share it out? Here, I can give it a go and see. So many of you are, the overwhelming majority of you are juggling lots and lots. Not a surprise. That's just, there you go. Can you see that?
I can see it, but I'm a presenter, so I don't. Yeah, attendees should be able to see it. Yep. Good.
Okay. There you go. So let's kind of ground in that. So what I really want to do is say, you know, part of the taking stock of your collaborative is to really, you know, be thinking about where are your strengths, what assets do you have, and what are your new needs as well, and new realities, so that you can really think creatively about reimagining your work and the planning, because what's needed now may not have been what you put into your strategic plan, you know, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and really think about how you might want to think about this. I'm a huge fan of this man, Alex Mansky. He is a Canadian legend for his work as a social innovator. And one of the things that he did was wrote a book called 6 Patterns to Spread Your Social Innovation, where he looked at 100 years of our country's history, saw there was no shortage of really great ideas for social change. Not every one of those ideas caught fire, however. And what he was really interested in were the ones that were. So who knew the University Women's Movement, which is now a global movement, began in Canada in the 1860s. So what he did was he took a deep dive at those ones that really caught fire to better understand what is it about an innovation and what do you need to be thinking about to have it catch fire. And the reminder that he brings to all of this is that human beings' capacity to be innovative and creative in the face of adversity is what defines us as a species. So every single one of us, you don't need a special degree, you don't need a special superpower or, you know, magic ring. This is something that we all do and that we've all done a lot of. We talked about in the last session, you know, when something like a pandemic happens, there's multiple pathways that we're kind of considering. The future feels less predictable, right? And there could be all kinds of different options for how the future unfolds. And so all the more reason why it's important that it heightens the value of the collaborative. Because if you think about it, each and every one of you is a different sensor around what's happening in the world around you, and having a number of different perspectives that you can draw from to get a roughly right sense of what's going on now and what might be needed is something that can be really, really strategically valuable to you. And that when we bring people together in constructive ways with good information, they are capable of doing really great work and thinking together. And often the output of that collaborative group, if the container that holds their conversation is well thought through, can actually result in something far greater than any one person could create alone. In fact, Al Admansky, again, one of the patterns that he really spoke of, which I love, is rarely, if ever, in a big social innovation kind of success, could you look at one person and attribute it to that individual. In fact, what he most often saw is what he called a partnership or a trio of innovators of different types. So the first he called the disruptive innovator, but his other name for them, which I love, is the passionate amateur. This is the person who's motivated by love. This is the person on your LCAN who is the first in their entire family to get a post-secondary education and has really had a successful life path as a result of that, and credits that decision and that ability to have secured a post-secondary education as one of the foundational elements of their success. That's that passionate person, the individual who knows what it's like to go on the journey. Unfortunately, if they start working alone, it's too easy for the system to dismiss them because they aren't of the system. Or we may feel inspired by them, but we tend to sort of see them as a unique hero. However, that disruptive innovator actually becomes more powerful when they link with the second innovator, who Al called the bridging innovator. So this would be something like an LCAN would be a great example of a bridging innovator. They're intermediaries, and they do two things. They validate the experience of the disruptor, but then they also challenge the disruptor to think bigger, to think beyond themselves. It isn't just about you and your family. You know, other families that didn't make the choice you did, what was stopping them? So really pushes the disruptor to be more articulate and saying, given the barriers that prevented other people, what are some of the changes that need to be made in the education system or in the community that would enable more people to be able to choose the pathway that you did? And then lastly, those two are starting to make big things happen together, but the magic really kicks in when they link arms with the third innovator. That's the person Al referred to as the receptive innovator. These are innovators within the organization. So these are people within the post-secondary school networks who know how things get done at their college. They know who to speak to. They know who's in support of you and who would be a champion internally. That's one thing they do. And then the second thing that they do, knowing, having talked to you both, that you want to make change happen, they will raise some of the issues and concerns that plague the other two innovators at the board, at the staff meetings. I've been hearing a lot about people who've experienced XYZ not being able to get easy access to post-secondary education. What are we doing at our college to address that, right? So that's what that role is. I think that's really useful and helpful. So when you look around your LCAN, you want to be thinking about who are the disruptors, who are the bridgers, who are the receptive folks, and do we need to round out some of those perspectives? We've talked about, you know, really thinking both beyond the immediate response, but studying the immediate response to say, what of that Band-Aid do we want to still see part of our new normal as we recover? And then how do we build resilience into our work, knowing, you know, all the uncertainties that we just explored in the last session? So really, when you bring it right back to the work of your collaborative, you need to reground in your purpose and bring, and so how can you come together with your team and revisit your purpose through diverse lenses, multiple voices, and really harvest the wisdom of having such a diverse network of people sensing what's happening out in the communities and what might be needed now. And are there ways in which you need to think about pivoting your work so that it can stay relevant, and at the same time pivot what you're doing but stay true to your core purpose and your core vision? You know, that's sort of like how you cope in the immediate. And then how do you connect long-term strategic goals back to your purpose? And how can you make and sustain meaningful change? That's really the longer-term resilience question you're asking yourself. When you change, if there's a change in your purpose or your value, you also, if that has a cascade, right? And it affects then maybe the partnerships that you have, or some may become, you may have partnerships in all the right places, but some may become more critical than others. And the value of collaboration is it allows you as a network to quickly open new doors and bring in new opportunities, new light. So these are the kinds of questions that you would be thinking about as you begin to reimagine what your collaborative work looks like. Given what you're hearing, given how the world around you has changed, what are people needing now? That may be true to and consistent with your vision and your purpose, and something that you could do easily. Or that there's no other natural leader in the community to take on, so if you all don't figure it out, then it ain't gonna happen. And yet we all know it'll be a critical win. Those are the kinds of things that you're wondering about. So when you think about reimagining your collaborative work, you look for, mine your history, right? Where have you been strong? Where do you have strong relationships? Where do you have a track record? What's easy for you? And what's missing, right? Because the world has changed and because you may have had to adapt some of your strategies, you may notice gaps in knowledge, gaps in connection, where you need to know more. So what's your strategy for filling gaps? Are there other collaboratives out there with whom you can align? That's a really great question. So this is a graphic, a visual. I'm going to try and see if I can make it a bit bigger for you. It's, again, another matrix, but really helpful, right? So on the one end of the continuum, you're looking at your internal strengths. And then on the other end, you're looking also at internal gaps. And then you also very intentionally not just look inward to your collaborative and your organizations, but you also look outward. And so you put yourself into the shoes of those you're trying to serve, the different stakeholders who would benefit from your work, employers, students, families, communities. And what you want to be asking is, you know, what are the gaps that they're really hungry to see filled right now? And where are there new opportunities or strengths that they can bring that align with the work you're already doing? I think sometimes, I know this from my own experience, you get so caught up in doing the work, right? It's really, it takes a moment and some real intentionality to say, okay, can we just put a pause on this for a sec? Can we step back and really understand what's changed, what's going on in the environment, and how much of what we have committed to do is still relevant and still necessary? And what are some new things that have shown up on the horizon that we have just pretended not to see because it's not part of our stated strategy? It's about giving yourselves permission, I think. So again, lovely reflective exercise. What do you know as a partner and as a collaborative that you can provide? And what do you now need? And then start thinking about who's in your orbit. Are there organizations that you can partner with that fit your profile, and or individuals? And what are the non-negotiables that you need those partners to know? about your work, about the principles and values that guide your work? Do you even have documents that really synthesize cleanly and succinctly what you're all about and your track record? What's your elevator pitch? I think I'd like now to just, I'll go on mute for about 5 minutes and invite you individually to just sort of jot down some thoughts, some ideas, some questions that are coming up for you.
Is everyone able to read that? Or if you can't, let me know. I can put those in the chat too, the 4 different headers.
Just a couple more minutes. maybe Megan, you can unmute all of us so that if folks have any ahas or questions that they'd like to share. After thinking on this one a bit, it'd be good to kind of hear from you all and where you're at.
Everybody should be unmuted now.
Thank you.
Except Christina,
folks,
I'm sorry. I can't unmute you without making you a panelist, so just holler if you want me to do that.
So did you have any insights or ahas as you navigated through any thoughts or ideas around new partners? I'm going to leave this call assuming that all Iowans are shy people. I don't think that's really true. Maybe.
I'm wondering if anyone developed new partnerships or new thoughts, you know, at the beginning of COVID when we sort of relaxed some funding restrictions so that you could do some more direct service type things in the community. And that's, to me, a theme that we keep going towards is, you know, what are we doing not just in schools, but in the community? And that while our goal remains college attainment, our strategies are changing a little bit to make sure that people have what they need in order to even be thinking about college attainment.
We had been hearing really even before COVID, but now it is increasing even more about the amount of time that counselors in the schools, really at all levels, were supporting students' social emotional needs. And one of the responses in or an initiative or a an effort that had been underway in Dubuque that really scaled up and reached out and included more people was some conversations around brain health. Because and that's the remove the stigma of mental health phrase that we use in our community. And then we had a large group, and then it broke it. An offshoot of that was children's brain health and looking at trauma-informed care and those adverse childhood experiences, and all of this just became so much more of a glaring need. And in a virtual way, the counselors had an even more challenging time, as did a lot of brain health providers, to figure out how to connect with individuals and families and whatever in need, the telehealth approach. But that was something that has been happening in our community, and it had a little bit of a groundswell going before, but because of the needs during COVID, especially with respect to students, kids didn't understand, why can't I see my friends? Why can't I be by my grandparents? Why can't I I miss school? So that's just one avenue that our community expanded and deepened, and it has continued to meet a lot of needs. And they're working on a mobile crisis unit and you know, an actual physical place someday that more of these kind of services can be provided. And so that may be one of those good outcomes from an unfortunate situation.
Wow, that's beautiful. Do others have examples like that? Yeah, Kim, go ahead.
I was just going to say our LCAN toward the end of April reached out to families when our teachers had done telephone conferences with students and families in March. They also took a poll and asked about their needs, or like internet access, if there was anything else that they were needing or was a barrier for them. And our LCAN decided to use some of our funds, both funds from our Iowa College Aid grant, but also some extra funds that we had through, I think it was part of our community grant. We purchased gas cards and toiletry cards, like cards to and just buy those basic needs. And our teachers, I think, handed them out when the families came for the extra meals, when students didn't have parents at home to provide their meals, the school did that for them. And so the teachers knew the families that were in need of these things. And so we reached out and kind of took care of their very basic needs. Gas cards, some of the people didn't have available gas to come and pick up their meals. And some of them were running low, you know, on toiletries and toothpaste and just those basic things. And so we kind of started at that level too, and felt really good about that.
That's beautiful. And it also goes a long way to building relationship, right? Angela, do you have a story? I think you might be muted still. I think you have to still unmute yourself. You know, your stories also reminded me, I was doing work with a community college here, and one of the big tensions or challenges was they had a number of support worker and social work students who lost the opportunity to do their placement, which is a critical skill set and requirement for graduation. And all the nonprofits that they have traditionally partnered with to supply those placements, like they couldn't take anybody. And so what was really cool was at the same time, there were a number of seniors and vulnerable people in the community that they knew of who were shut in and didn't have any biological family nearby to check in on them or whatever. And so they actually put out a call and got names and phone numbers of vulnerable seniors and or vulnerable people in the community who were feeling really isolated and alone. And what they did was they did training and support so that those placement students actually got paired up with one or two or three of the folks that self-identified, and they would have weekly phone-ins, just check-ins, phone check-ins around how people were doing and whatever. And I thought that was a really creative way in which two unique problems for two different groups got kind of pulled together and ended up being a win-win for both. Okay, maybe what I'll do, if we can, is just sort of move forward a little bit further around. So how do you refine your approaches? And I just want to reground. I think when I was visiting with you all last time, I shared with you, we at Tamarack really lean in quite a bit on this collaboration spectrum, which is helpful because it reminds you that there's multiple layers and levels of collaboration So when I say collaborate and you say collaborate, we may not be talking about the same thing. And not every partner that you reach out to do you need to collaborate with to the same degree or in the same way. So, so it's helpful to be reminded that there's a range of options for people. And then as you're going out, if you're choosing to build and expand out and include new partners in your collaborative effort, really helpful to sort of bring this as a visual and say, where are we now in terms of the level of collaboration that exists between us? And given the new reality we find ourselves in, which level, what's the level of collaboration that makes the most sense? And then engage them in a conversation about, so what would it take to what, you know, how might we make this happen? How might we put wheels on this? And not everyone's going to want to collaborate with you, and not everyone's going to want to collaborate to the same degree, and that's okay. But it is about creating those opportunities to connect where it makes sense. The other thing that could be really useful and helpful, if sort of as you were doing this brainstorm, you came up with maybe 6 different organizations or other collaborative initiatives that you think it might make sense for you to partner up with or learn more about, you don't have to reach out to every single one of them all at the same time. So you as a collaborative and your LCAN can prioritize, you know, who's the most important we want a person or organization we want to approach, and who, you know, and so you can tackle them at a pace that makes sense for you. I love this too. So this takes that collaboration spectrum and really begins to expand it out even further. So there's loose collaboration. There's decentralized collaboration, where you have multiple but connected. You know, in some ways, you know, each one of the LCANs is its own entity, and yet when you come together as a network, there are things that you can do together that make more sense as opposed to things that you're doing on your own. So helpful when you're kind of adapting this approach is to think of everything as a prototype or an experiment. Use metaphors, use storytelling, and unlock people's motivation. So I like this. This comes from the work of IDEO, which is a human-centered design firm. But, you know, if part of what you're thinking about is there's a problem, you know, a lot of our students don't have access to, you know, the basic necessities of life right now. That's a problem. Okay, so what are some, and that we are assuming that without those things, their capacity to learn is going to be next to zero, or we're not going to be able to retain them as students. Okay, so then what is it that we could do? So you brainstorm, right, the different options and opportunities that you might come up with together for how you could contribute to a solution. And then what would have to be true for us to be able to, you know, do this, to get the gas cards or to contribute in some way. So that helps you identify your constraints and what, you know, what might impact the success of the idea, what's going to get in the way, and then what's a safe way we can try this out. Can we try it out on one campus? Can we try it out, you know, for one semester? It's about, you know, putting a discrete sort of timeline on it, but giving yourselves permission to try it and then see what the response is to it. And then based on that response, decide, is this something that we want to improve on? Is this something that, you know, we would iterate and enhance by doing X, Y, Z? Is this something that ought to continue? And maybe it didn't work, you know, or maybe it's a one-time thing, but, you know, 6 months from now, we see that even though it was a one-time thing, it had a profound effect in beginning to build powerful and important relationships of trust. And so that might lead to, okay, so it's about relationships of trust. So how could we strengthen, you know, opportunities to build relationships in all the different interactions we have? Like that might be the next iteration that comes out of this. There is an engineering firm called Engineers Without Borders, and every year they publish a failure report. And I love it because what it is all the new things that they've tried that didn't work. And what has that taught them about what they're, about what of their work needs to remain, what things do they still need to be thinking about. But there's something I think really liberating when we can just give ourselves permission to try it with no commitment. And the idea is also not to go to perfection, right? What's good enough that we can road test it? My new mantra someone gave me, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. If things just swirl around in my head as a great idea, but they never show up on paper or they never end up being put out as a community experiment, what good are they really? So thoughts and reactions to this notion or this idea of prototyping something. How does that shift for you, right? What might be possible? So here's like just a worksheet, right? What's the idea that you want to kind of play around with as you reimagine what collaboration looks like? What's your question? What assumptions do you need to test and with whom? What's your experiment? And what will you do to answer the question? What evidence will you collect? How will you know that what you've tried has worked? How to improve it?
I think I can jump in with one question. One thing that I feel like we struggle with, or that LCANs might struggle with in identifying their goals, is how aspirational to be. And I noticed that tool talked about like not making the problem so big that it's too big to test out. I was wondering if you could kind of give an example of maybe, a problem that's too large and then refining it down to a more reasonable, attainable, problem to address.
Yeah, right now we at Tamarack are in the process of launching a new national collective impact initiative in partnership with our federal government. And what's interesting, you guys will, in particular, you might find it useful. It's too early in the days for me to tell you lots of results yet because we're just launching. But the curiosity, the interest, the question was about all the young people under 30 that are neither in school nor employed, that they seem to be facing barriers to transitioning from childhood to adulthood, whatever that looks like for them. And in particular, our federal counterpart was saying, we have lots of prototypes and approaches that seem to work well in urban centers, but then they fall flat in smaller, more rural, more remote communities. And we need to learn more about this. And so in partnership with us, we have engaged 14 different small, more rural, more remote communities right across the entire country. And each one of those local communities is using the collective impact approach. So basically building an LCAN for their community. And they're looking at and needing to use the collective impact framework to think about what is it that they want to do together in their community to create new pathways for young people to successfully transition to adulthood. And it's been an interesting process because we've been now working, so the 14 different communities have had to find who's the leadership table, like they've had to build their LCAN. We can commit through our federal partner 5 years of funding. So they know that it's going to be around for a while, and they're getting keen, but we're starting to work with the local communities about building their common agenda. And the challenge is you want to be aspirational, yes, but then for the next layer, you want to root it in something real, right? So, together, these different partners have put all these studies on the table that have been done with and for youth and about youth needs and about youth learning. And the challenge for us really is to work with those on the ground staff people to say, don't keep it theoretical. Don't keep it up in the air. It's not about that you have found these 25 studies, you know, from different sectors over the last 4 years. Can someone dig into those and pull out what's the essence that we need to ground in, that's knowledge in our community, so that we're not just naming the aspiration, but we are taking it that next step that says, and these are the 4 or 5 strategies or priorities that we as a network are going to champion together, because we believe that those are the best guests to get us to the aspiration. So I find if people stay too much in theory and or they don't root in the reality of the data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, about what we already know, and say, look, guys, we can't do it all, right? There could be 5 legitimate strategies, 6 different big pieces that we might want to take on. So then what we have been really encouraging them to do is, can they do a little bit of research that frames out this, you know, this potential, you know, we could champion something around rural broadband, right? We could, like, that might be one of our big strategies. So what would that look like, right? What would we be doing? Who else is in that space in the community already, right? They're, you know, doing that little bit of homework and saying, what would our contribution be? What could we bring? You know, whatever the things are, and then just having them, we were calling them half-baked ideas. Can you put a stake in the ground with 6, 7 possible half-baked things that you could work on together, that are things that no one of you could do alone? And then what we want you to do is put it onto one page as a possibility with a graphic, like an infographic, and we want you to shop it around to different groups in the community and say, we can't do all 7 of these priorities. We need to pick one. We need to pick 2. Which are the most important ones that you personally would want to get involved with? And let the community tell you where you've got it right and where you got it wrong. Don't unveil this polished document and then kind of stand back. That's what I would say. And then the other piece that I've been thinking a lot about lately is maybe the work of the LCAN is to create the container that invites everyone in the community to do their bit, right? So you're mobilizing the community as a whole. It's not your job to deliver the answer for the community or the solution for the community. It's a slightly different shift. But I always think of that Erie Together Collective Impact Project, who did it so beautifully by announcing their work, right, and calling it a county-wide civic movement. So if you take a civic movement lens, how are you the catalyst? Yes, absolutely, and there is meaningful work that you are advancing, but how are you also making time to do the ongoing communication, engagement, and back and forth with community, so that you know how they can get plugged into, and you're asking them to do things to help advance that agenda. Make sense? Does that answer your question? Like, I think for me, it's you get out of the theory and you get real about your community. And if you don't know, then that means you need to find ways to ask people. And don't be afraid to ask people what their pain points are, what are the changes that they think need to happen either in particular systems or changes in experience for people that would make a difference. And you won't, it will feel like, it feels weird to go out and ask people when you don't have the answer, but that's when you need to do it. And if you listen enough, over time, you'll start hearing the same 5 or 6 things come up. You won't hear it at first. And then you have to think about, given who's at your LCAN table, of all the things that people are saying are barriers, which are the ones that you're probably well positioned to really champion? Make sense?
Yeah, thank you. So
Anybody else?
Yeah.
We may have time for one more comment or question or thought. Anybody?
Sylvia, as you were sharing that little gem just a couple of moments ago about LCANs creating the container, you know, being the catalyst, inviting community to plug in it. And we heard earlier, Anne talk about sustainability, and tomorrow Megan is going to address that some more. It seems to me like that's a real big connection to the work of sustainability.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, Donna? I think that tapping into the skills and resources and contributions of ordinary people is probably the greatest untapped resource in a lot of this collective impact work. And I say that knowing that it's not easy, because it's hard, because it's not all, it's sort of like trying to nail Jello to a wall. Like, who are these people that we're trying to connect with, right? And so it takes a little bit of tenacity to think about who's already out there, who are the networks that are already meeting, and how do we think about, even if you support what we're doing, here's 2 things you can do, right? Or show us your support so that you know that people are with you, because you need that like fuel too. It makes me think about a little community group. It's a service club actually in my small little town. And for more than a decade, they have taken it upon themselves to put up beautiful Christmas lights in this tiny little park, and signs, and and just festivities. And there was like a handful of them that do it every year, and they were getting really discouraged because they had no idea, does anybody even care that we're doing this, right? And so one of them borrowed a trail counter from one of the trails groups over the month or 2 months that they put the lights up. And what they discovered was more than 12,000 people walked through in that 1 month to admire the lights and have a bit of a Christmas experience. They were blown away. They had no idea it was so many people. And that was powerful for a couple of reasons. One, it totally reinvigorated them. But then it also gave them some really good tangible data about who all was coming and what times were they coming and how many people were coming, so that when they went to city council and they went to the local businesses who often chipped in to help offset the cost, they had some real quantifiable numbers about the number of people that were coming. So yeah, I think it's really cool. Well, folks, I think we are coming to the end of our time together. So I would just love to hear from you. One word, one phrase that's really top of mind for you. What are you taking away from the conversation we just had? Please go ahead and type that in. And while you're waiting, the notion of building a movement for change and creating a container is actually the focus of a new virtual workshop that my colleague Liz Weaver and I are delivering twice, once in November, once in December. So you can check it out if you're curious to know more. We'd love to have you there. And I wish you guys the best of luck as your day of LCAN thinking and strategizing and stuff continues. And I am so appreciative for the opportunity to spend some time with you today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for coming back to be with us and provide a little bit of continuity during these times where everything is changing. We always just really appreciate all of your, lived experience and the tools that you share. And I know that our LCANs are going to go back to their tables and use these tools to facilitate some really good discussion. So Thank you so
Well,
much.
that's lovely. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Great
too.
to see you all again.
And we will see
I
everybody.
do like the continuity too, I have to say.
Yeah, yeah. Feels
Well, good luck tomorrow. Thank you.
And we'll see everybody else
Bye.
tomorrow morning.